let's go back to the beginning.
Sure,
So
let's go back to the
what
beginning.
kind of upbringing did you have, and do you want to give a little introduction to yourself for the listeners?
Sure. Well, Grace, thank you so much for having me
That's
today.
all right.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And congratulations on the progress of your podcast so far.
Thank you.
So I'm Zaf. I am a London born and raised entrepreneur, but it was not always been like that. I was born as the second of 4 siblings. My parents are first generation immigrants. My father's from Mauritius. He came over when he was 14 years old, and my mother came over when she got married at 18. And so they started very young, their journey of parenthood and adulthood in London. And there were some really strong moral and religious values around upbringing, but they were very much extrapolating from their parents and their upbringing as well. So that was my model for growing up. It was one of performance, one of hard work, one of discipline, one of servitude. And that served me well, taking me through school, having to perform, getting the best grades and showing up and being creative, which is what I wanted to do. But it was also about which subjects would I focus on. Very much academic subjects, less creative subjects. I loved art, I loved sport, but that wasn't really something that was going to pay the bills. So I ended up doing maths and physics and chemistry for my A-levels, which didn't go particularly well, but did just enough to get into university. Went to university in Loughborough, which was outside of London, a nice break to get away from home, as it were. But when I came back, I kind of stumbled into the real estate industry. And to give context, the time I came back to London was around the time of the global financial crisis back in '07. And so the market was not in a good place, and it was a really hard time to get started in an industry where I had no relevant vocational academic experience. So it was a really hard time. I spent a bit of time volunteering, working with mentors, shadowing some people to try and learn the ropes and just understand what is this real estate game. And the reason I found out about it was purely by accident. I stumbled upon a company that was presenting a project management graduate program at a grad fair. I thought, this sounds really interesting. It has working with people, check. Being creative, check. Working outdoors, check. I was like, this is really interesting. It's kind of meeting these things. What the hell is project management? What the hell is construction? Like, honestly, had no idea. There was no design to get into the industry. I tried my hand, made a few applications, and the obvious responses I was getting is, love your enthusiasm, love your passion. The global financial crisis is, or the markets are likely to crash. We're not sure if we can take a punt on someone who doesn't have the right experience. So you're in a bit of a catch-22. What do you do? And so I went and did this mentorship program. I found an individual who's willing to take me under his wing, and I volunteered with him for about 6 months.
A lot of people will be listening thinking, right, how do I actually find mentorship? Because it is such a struggle when you come out of university.
It really is.
You don't have that vocational training. And so many people be in the position that you were. So what really are the steps to getting mentorship or work experience?
It's really manageable nowadays with the advent of social media. So again, for context, smartphones weren't a thing. LinkedIn certainly wasn't as prevalent as it is now, nor was social media and access to potential peers. But I would say the key thing is reaching out. The thing that enabled me to get a mentor back in 2006, 2007 was a network connection. It's someone who knew someone who knew someone who would say, I have a conversation with Zaf and see what you could do. And that's really how it went. It was about 4 degrees of connection before I found someone who's willing to take a punt on me and give me a bit of time. And so really that's exactly what LinkedIn enables us to do today. You can find a connection, find another connection. Most individuals in senior leadership roles are very happy and willing to have a conversation with graduates, with young individuals who are less experienced or who just have curiosity. I meet a lot of youngsters who are just curious. And sometimes having a conversation is a huge amount of value, or spending a day with me in the office and seeing actually what do I do, I think is a really great thing. So that's what I would say. Be audacious, reach out, ask the question. A lot of people don't ask the question because they're afraid what the answer might be, but ask the question.
100%. I mean, I get LinkedIn messages asking for work experience, and it's not something that I offer at the moment because I work completely remotely. And I started my apprenticeship in COVID, and I remember how difficult it was to learn remotely. So I'd never want to put someone else in that position. But I always do give up my time if someone wants to ask me what it's like to run a business or what is accountancy. I will always give up my time for that because I wish someone would have given up their time when I was in the same position.
Absolutely. There's a good friend of mine who's a very accomplished businesswoman, and she offers these 30-minute guidance slots. And she'll have a day, she'll sit down in one place, and she'll say, you have 30 minutes with me, ask me whatever you want. How much do I earn? What to do here? Can you connect me with this person? But the onus is then on the individual who's coming and spending the time. Yeah. So if I get like you, a LinkedIn message. And I, like you, I work remotely or I co-work. So I don't have a fixed office at the moment, which is good and bad. But then I say, okay, if we have a conversation or we have a coffee, the only thing I ask of you is you have a very clear set of questions and objectives to make the most of that conversation. Because at the end of the day, time is precious. You're a busy person, I'm a busy person, but we want to help. And it's very difficult to spend time with individuals who aren't clear on what they want, but that might be it. I don't know what I want to do here, here, and here. I think I want to do that. What do you think? And that's a useful starting point.
No, that is absolutely brilliant. But tell me more about your mentorship.
So my personal mentorship, or what I do currently?
What you did in 2006 that you got.
Yeah, so the individual that I was very fortunate to get connected with was effectively a community developer. And he was going around the country building mosques and community centers all over the country. And so I just sat in his car, drove around with him, carried his bag, carried the notebooks, whatever it was, on site, just showing interest and trying to come up with ideas. Now, I'd studied physics at university, and I thought, surely there's a way in which I can put my physics to good use, whether it's understanding structural matters or concrete or whatever it was. It wasn't really the case. So I did a great degree, but no real vocational application. So it was curiosity. And the thing that I found was just asking questions, and being encouraged to ask questions was really, really good. And I spent a good 6 months with him, traveled around. We must have seen about 7 or 8 different projects, even helped with architect meetings, and just, again, being exposed to that and asking, can I join you for this meeting? I'll sit quietly, I'll take notes, and then maybe I'll ask you questions at the end of it. And who doesn't like answering questions about themselves? So that was really useful. But I took that valuable experience and I went back to the market here in London and said, this is what I've done, take an interest in me. And that's how I got my first proper job.
And so what did you learn from your first job?
So my first job was interesting because I went through the graduate recruitment process, had the degree, but I was pitted against maybe 7 or 8 different individuals who all had very relevant degrees. They had construction project management, real estate finance, some other real estate based degree. And I was there with a physics degree and a whole load of green. I was really wet behind the ears and just really interested to find out more about the industry. But on the first day of work, I was the only one who turned up. And I asked the guys, where are all the others? And I was told they weren't offered jobs because they had a very specific way of looking at things. It was harder to mold them into a format that was very much relevant to the workplace. And so I think demonstrating that I was willing to learn, willing to be malleable, willing to be flexible, but also just had a sheer load of passion and interest with the basic ingredients to get me started. And then I acquired all of the technical knowledge over years to come and got my qualifications and my chartership. But it was starting with that curiosity, first and foremost. And that really is more of a values-based hire than a competency-based hire, which I think is really important.
It is. And I think a lot of companies now are doing value-based hires.
Most definitely.
Because you can teach someone all of that technical knowledge, but you cannot teach someone passion.
No.
When I got my first job, I was like, I don't know anything about accountancy, but I really, really, really want to learn. And they were like, brilliant, come on board then. And
Absolutely.
I was like, and I'm here and I'm asking questions and I'm being involved.
Absolutely.
And I think that is so valuable. But then later on in your journey, you made the switch to private equity.
That's right.
Why?
A lot of people in the world of consultancy, professional services, and the same as whether it's in real estate, whether it's in finance, whatever the role may be, they always talk about the jump from consultancy or a service-based business to being the client. And in this instance, we were very fortunate to work with some great clients, people like British Land, Aviva Investors, Royal Mail, and they were all developers in their own right, albeit different funding models. And one of the big clients was Blackstone. And through demonstration of who I was as a person, they could almost try before they bought. They could see me as a consultant working for them in the projects, being diligent, being interested, being curious, being creative. And so it wasn't really a job interview as such. It was more of a conversation. Do you want to come and work with us? And so when I got that conversation, it was amazing. I thought, this is a huge leap forward. And it would enable me, being selfish, to be, this is a great step for my career because I'm now making that leap from consultant to client. And I'm working with a really well-known global entity like Blackstone. This is going to be exciting. And it was high octane, it was full on. And look, I'm not going to lie, I had loyalties with my first company. They took a punt on me at a time when the global financial situation was very, very precarious. I got married whilst I was at M3, I had my first child, and they were very supportive through that process. And I was very torn, I'll be honest with you, Grace. It was really hard. But at the end of the day, I have to be selfish. I have to grow. And unless moving to the private equity world was a real opportunity to grow.
And so we hear PE quite a lot, but what actually is it?
So PE, private equity, and you have large organizations like Blackstone who are effectively large fund managers. Their job is to invest the private equity of funds who may be pension funds, they may be high net worth individuals that don't have the skill set or the expertise to review or underwrite potential investment opportunities. And so, Grace, you've got a couple of £1 billion, you give it to someone like Blackstone as a fund manager, and they're investing your private equity on your behalf. So you will have an agreement with Blackstone that every year you will receive a set return. And then Blackstone then for its investments on your behalf, essentially, will also agree a higher return. So there's a spread. So Blackstone can make their margin and you as the ultimate investor will get your return. That's typically how PE works. And there's different fund structures that have different mandates, different risk profiles, but that's essentially what it is.
And so what were some of the biggest challenges working in private equity?
The challenges that I didn't fully appreciate going in were more cultural than anything else. I was told, Zaf, be careful when you go in, they're going to want their pound of flesh. And they really did. They really wanted their pound of flesh because they're on the clock for investing Grace's billions. And so they have to be seen to be making very harsh, very quick, very cutthroat decisions on behalf of their investors. That's how they make the money. And so if you're not willing to work in that pace, it can be very overwhelming. And so the pace of work was a real challenge. And the sheer volume of work that I had to manage was a challenge. But you rise very, very quickly or you step away. I rose to the challenge and it was a great learning curve for me. And within about sort of 2-3 months, I had a portfolio of development and asset management of around £1.5 billion.
That's incredible.
Which was very scary, very exciting. But yeah, I was accountable for that. And so that was a real shift for me.
That must have been so overwhelming. It's one of those situations where you swim or you sink, I think.
That's exactly it. And unfortunately, there are people who unfortunately sink and they take an alternative route or they really thrive in that kind of high pressure environment. And I think I really enjoyed that high pressure environment. And when you find that right flow, lots of magical things start to happen and you really start to garner great relationships with other people because they see how well you interact with them and how well you can perform and how well you can ultimately deliver a business plan.
Definitely. And so what attributes do you have that you think made you thrive in that environment?
If I go back to the beginning of the story and how I was brought up with a set of guidelines and values and principles around hard work, dedication, servitude, those were really core skills that I think I was able to pull back and utilize because it was about understanding what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? And that was really something at the absolute base root of what I was doing. The idea of integrity was really there. And even if I wasn't being micromanaged, and when you're working on large portfolios, you can't be micromanaged. You have to be left to do what you need to do. Otherwise, you can't grow. And so integrity was an important part. Am I doing what I'm saying I'm going to do? Whether that's in a weekly meeting with my line manager or whether it's to shareholders or to the board I'm reporting. So that was a really key feature. And then it was also because you can't manage a massive portfolio without working with external parties. And that was a really key thing. So you have a lot of external stakeholders, whether they're architects, engineers, asset managers, portfolio managers, people on the estate, loads of different people, loads of stakeholders. And so the way in which you communicated with them was really key. So the qualities of kindness and being just genuine to people was a really valuable asset that I'll be honest with you, didn't appreciate the power of that asset when I was that much younger. And it was one of the things that a lot of people enjoyed interacting with me because whether you're working at private equity or whether you're working in a school, whether you're working in any organization or in a bakery, how you make people feel is what they remember rather than what you said. And so if I had every intention of having an interaction with someone, I was kind, I was honest, I was fair, and they were like, I enjoy dealing with Zaf. And that was a really key thing for me. I felt that was a weakness of mine. Mm-hmm. And I was told for many, many years that it was a weakness of mine because the industry is very cutthroat and there's almost no space or wasn't much space for sensitivity, for kindness. And so intrinsically, I started to feel like I didn't really fit here. That was the beginning of me trying to find a space that was more aligned to who I was.
Mm-hmm. And so you did go on to start your first business afterwards. Exactly. What was the thought process behind that?
So I felt that the kinder I was, or the more aligned to my personal values I was, the more misaligned I was with the organization that I was in. For example, I like to be colorful, I like to be creative, and that wasn't necessarily accepted wholeheartedly in the organization that I was in. And so it was intrinsic for me incumbent on me to go and find an organization or create a culture that was accepting of who I was. So that was a bit of a push factor. Culture I was in wasn't really a place I felt I could grow. And then for whatever reason, whether it was utilizing those skills from when I was a child and my upbringing and tapping into my values of integrity and kindness, that really enabled me to start to see bigger than what I was doing. I'll be really honest with you, there wasn't anyone's job in the organization that I wanted to take. So I thought, okay, I've got to create something here. It was the time of life where a lot of my friends were either getting into relationships and looking to try to buy, but they were really struggling. I thought there's got to be a better way. You look around and there wasn't really a better way. The property market in the UK, London, is broken, and thought maybe there's a little thing I can do here. I can utilize skills that I've amassed over these last 8-9 years in real estate development, in finance, in investment raising, in modeling. I've built up a pretty good network. Maybe I can do something else outside to solve a problem. And that was the beginning of me stepping into the world of entrepreneurship.
And so what was sort of your solution to the problem?
So what we came up with, I co-founded a business with my cousin in 2015. I was kind of ghost working, partly at Blackstone, partly at Spaces with my cousin, until I was able to fully jump out in 2016. So it was quite hard. Ron was running 2 jobs. But what we came up with was a concept that is now very popularly known as co-living. And the idea is essentially it's branded rooms that are very much just focused on your personal space, a bedroom, high quality amenities, and then you share that amongst other people. Now that's existed for many, many years, but not so much in a purpose-built format. So people have been house sharing for years. Villages and communities have been sharing for years. But what we were looking to try and do is build that specifically for people in central London. And then the idea was if you can deliver that at a lower cost of rent to then ordinarily renting a studio or a 1-bed, then you're winning. You're providing a solution that doesn't exist. So that's what the idea of co-living was back in 2016. However, the challenges were that the stakeholder market, the planners, the capital didn't really understand this concept because they understood HMOs, which is a bit of a dirty word, houses of multiple occupancy, where 3 or 4 people might share one house, but they didn't understand purpose-built HMOs or purpose-built co-living. And so it was a real educational journey. And I'm happy to say that we raised a lot of money in the first venture. We bought a building, we took it through planning, but we didn't get a planning permission, unfortunately. And that was a harsh lesson learned because we'd taken on huge amounts of risk by buying an asset and then attempting to try and convert it to something else through a planning education process, design process. We spent lots of money, millions of pounds on fees. And unfortunately, that business plan didn't quite come to fruition. And so we were left with a difficult decision, which ultimately we decided to sell the asset, try to recoup as much money as possible, and then go back to the drawing board.
And so companies that are thinking of trying to raise, how do you get ready to raise? What's the process?
I guess it really depends on what it is you're raising for, first and foremost. It always starts with the person. And the question is very broad. And I do get asked this a lot. It's always, what are your intentions as an individual? Are you a solopreneur? Are you an individual founder? Or are you looking to augment your skills with other parties, co-founders, senior management team, or whatever that may be? And that's usually, whether it's in real estate, less so in real estate, because ultimately the bricks and mortar carries value. But even then, and the reason I say that is my CV at the time was pretty strong. I had a really good set of projects that I delivered, worked for some phenomenal companies, and that really helped me raise the capital. But the idea of the investors investing in me as well as the business plan, that was a dual-pronged approach. So what I'm saying to the young entrepreneurs out there or people who are thinking of raising is, what are you offering to potential investors? Are your skill sets unique? Are you living your values? Because that's really what they look at first and foremost. They buy into you as a person. And if then your model is SMMA, accountancy, real estate, finance, tech, whatever it may be, that's almost secondary. The business plan of the actual vehicle needs to stand up to scrutiny, absolutely. And there's lots of different ways of testing that. Is it a profitable venture, first and foremost? Does it make more money than it costs? But you've really got to look inward into who you are as a person, because that's what you're selling first and foremost. And how you come across is really, really important. I'll give you a quick anecdote. When I was raising later down the line after the years at Spaces, and I'd been through a series of other challenges, I had a conversation with an investor, a potential investor, and he asked me some very probing questions because he'd seen on Companies House, earlier ventures, and they hadn't quite gone to plan. And in that moment, Grace, I sat there and thought, do I give him a version of the world that is rose tinted and the kind of perception that I think is going to look good, or do I just be really raw and honest?
HMRC are introducing a new initiative called Making Tax Digital, and this may affect you. But Making Tax Digital is simple with Sage. From April 2026, if you earn more than £50,000 from your self-employment or from being a landlord, you'll need to use Making Tax Digital compatible software to do the following. Keep digital records, submit a summary of your income and expenses on a quarterly basis, and finalize your business income and expenses at the end of the year. With Sage's software for the self-employed, you can activate MTD income tax self-assessment return functionality to ensure you're ready and compliant for the future.
And whatever it was, I decided to go with the latter. I was really raw, really honest. And at the end of the conversation, he said to me, Zaf, I really appreciate that honesty. I would love to invest in you. And that's really growth. And I was owning that growth and owning those mistakes. So yeah, work on yourself, because that's the key thing to start.
And I think people buy into other people and emotions more than a business plan.
100%.
I've seen some brilliant pitch decks in my time and I'm like, wow, this looks brilliant. And then you meet the person and you either know that they can deliver it or they're a bit wishy-washy, but they can put together a brilliant pitch deck.
100%. And it's really interesting when you take that, the idea of Tesla, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Steve Jobs, late Steve Jobs, Apple. And it's really the person who is behind the brand who empowers the brand. And that's really what it is. People buy into the vision of the individual. And then, of course, the product is going to be great. But ultimately, it's the individual. And they often have, I can't tell you how many followers any of those individuals have, but they tend to have more than the brand themselves.
Yeah, personal branding is huge.
Personal branding is huge.
Because people buy into it.
Exactly.
Which is brilliant. It's great.
So lean into it.
Exactly. But throughout your business journey, obviously you've had so many ups and downs, but what do you think has been your high and what do you think has been your low?
Let's start with the lows. And lows are only temporary, because in entrepreneurship or any phase of life, I even tell this to my kids, failure is only a failure if you decide to stop.
Yeah.
You decide to quit. So in business, a failure could be quite expensive, could put you out of business. But if it doesn't kill you, and I say this lightly because I know there are people who have sadly gone to the stage where they've felt that it was the only way out. But if it doesn't kill you, what do you learn from that moment? What do you learn from that particular incident? And how do you use that to fuel you to move forward? One of the things, and this is definitely not to toot my own horn, people have said, Zaf, you've endured so many setbacks, whether you've been screwed over, whether projects have gone sideways, investment being pulled, whatever the deal is, you've always got back up to go again. It's amazing that people can recognize that, first and foremost. And then I ask myself, what am I driven by? And I'm driven by a bigger why. And for me, just very quickly, that was about creating safe homes for people where they can live their true authentic selves and be the best value to humanity. That's really it. So if I stop what I'm doing, I'm potentially stopping an individual who might have a great idea that can live in one of my buildings and can really create something revolutionary for the world. That's kind of my service to humanity. That's how I see it. So that's been driving me to go on. And then that very nicely ties into the high, because to have the opportunity to do that is huge. And so I feel absolutely privileged, really honored that I can play in a space where I can really try to create some long-term interest. I mean, look, the market in the last couple of years has been particularly hard. After the mini budget in 2022, those that were following it, it was not particularly pretty for a lot of people. Interest rates went crazy, supply chain costs went through the roof, and so business really stagnated. And there was a point in time early this year where I said, I'm done with this industry. I kid you not, I'm done. And it's got a funny way of pulling you back in. And I pulled back in, found a great new partner. And I thought, I'm just going to go and set up a digital business. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. Anyone who's listening who has a digital business, I know it's not easy, but I thought I'm just going to go and set up a digital business and try and tout my experience online.
Yeah.
But no, I was driven by a greater sense of purpose. And so that was really, to reflect on that was, okay, Zaf, you're here for a reason. Let's go again. You're not dead. Pick yourself up. You still got your roof over your head. Pick yourself up and go again.
And I think that's so important. And people speak about purpose all of the time, but it's so integral to running a successful business. You have to have a purpose bigger than A, yourself, and B, money. If someone goes around, like I've talked to people all the time and I go, why do you run your business? And if they go, money, well, that's not really a reason, is it?
No.
You can make money, but sometimes if you lead with purpose, the money follows after anyway.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And so I've really intentionally made a point of connecting with people, both in my industry and outside of my industry, who live by those values, because you surround yourself with good energy, with good people, and that only spirals you up.
100%.
So people are doing that, whether it's in finance or whether it's in tax or accounting or whatever it may be. Okay, great. You're doing something that is bigger than yourself. That's admirable.
Definitely. And so we've touched on it previously, but when did you think it was the right time for you to go to therapy to do internal work?
Great question. So my first foray into any sort of personal development was in 2016. And I must admit, it was not something that I had set out. It wasn't something that I designed, but it was my ex business partner, who was my cousin as well. He's my cousin. And he had just done a group therapy session and said, Zaf, it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I got loads of great things out of it. I think you should do it. And he encouraged me, and I went, and I loved it. And it was incredible. It was, you're in an environment of 100 or so people. Everyone's going through these wonderful breakthroughs and working through these challenges. You think, this is incredible. Wow. And that was kind of my first taste of what anything to do with therapy or personal development was. Because again, being raised in a South Asian household, therapy is not something that you talk about. I kid you not, it got to a point where I was doing one-to-one therapy, and I've done lots of different work over the years. And I went home to my parents one day and I said, by the way, guys, I'm in proper therapy. And everyone like clattered. You just hear the cutlery clash on the table. And it's okay, it's healthy. In the same way you go to the gym with a personal trainer, potentially, you work on your body, like I'm working on my mind. And so, yeah, that was the first thing in 2016. And there was a point in 2018 where it got really bad for me, Grace, where I was really struggling to reconcile my commitments in life. And to the point where my second child was born, and the afternoon that she was born, I was back in the office. Yeah, exactly. I don't think I'll ever live that down. I never live. And I'm not proud of that. I don't say that. That was a massive, like, discombobulated set of priorities in my mind, what I thought was the right thing to be doing. And I was conflicted by what I thought I was obligated to do to the business, to my business partner, to the investors, to my wife, to my family. Didn't really have a clue. And what that manifested in over many, many months of, do I do right by the business? Do I do right by my family? Zaf was worn thin. And I kid you not, I got to a point in March 2018 and I decided that I'm going to end my life. And that was a really harrowing realization for me. Because, again, being raised in a household where you talk about death and the impact of that in religion, suicide is one of the greatest sins. In most modern religions, suicide is one of the greatest sins. So I'm like, how is this even something that's crossing my mind? And it wasn't something that I thought about, but clearly it was in my mind as something that would be a viable route out.
And that must have been so scary for you.
It was incredibly scary. Incredibly scary. And the solutions to that beyond therapy were, if something happens in the business, then that will give me a route out. Something happens in my marriage, that will be a route out. I was given power to factors outside of me. I wasn't taking any control or any responsibility for fixing the problem with me. And then I went to my first one-to-one therapy, proper psychotherapy, and that really helped just try and uncover this, what I've just articulated, that Zaf had not been considered in all of the equations, had been running for his entire life. Because I was doing something for them, something for my parents, my family, my business partner. I was always doing for other people, but I was never doing for me. And it's so simple, but so profound. I was like, okay, let me learn a bit more about this. Let me indulge in this a bit more. And that's, there's always been elements over the last 8 years now. I've tried to invest time and energy into some form of therapy. And about 2 years ago, I had one of the most profound therapy sessions ever, and it was hypnotherapy, where I was able to go back deep to my early childhood and really have an adult conversation with scenarios that had occurred in my life, because there were certain patterns that were showing up day after day after day in my life, and I couldn't shake them. But I went through this process of hypnotherapy and deep subconscious work, and when I woke, I was free from them, and it was absolutely life-changing.
That must have been so healing.
So incredibly healing. Because it meant I was able to then have conversations with people where these things had happened, and I'm the only one carrying this burden. And I'm able to talk to them, whether it was my wife, whether it was my parents, or my brother or my sisters, and say, this is what's been going on for me. I'm not doing this to make you wrong, but I'm just letting you know. And it was such a healing time for me to go through and have difficult conversations, but just free myself. And I had to be really careful not to just like spew on people.
Yeah.
And that was dangerous as a prospect. But when it came out of it, it was also a very healing conversation for the other side. I mean, the way in which I was able to reconnect with my parents on a much, much deeper level was just something I could have only have dreamt of.
Well, that's brilliant. Well done to you.
Thank
So
you.
it takes a lot of work to be able to do that. I've been in therapy for years.
Yeah.
There's things that I have fully healed from that I'm very grateful for.
Congratulations.
But still bits of work that I know I need to do on myself, because I find myself reacting to certain situations.
Totally.
And I go, okay, this is because of X, Y, Z. So there's still work to do. But it's also just having that self-awareness as well, I think, is really key.
Absolutely. And I think you said it beautifully there. It's dialing up that self-awareness. And the more work that you do, and the more active feedback that you go out and seek. And I think that's one of the big taboos that still surrounds mental health and personal work, is no one wants to be, have their foibles and insecurities highlighted. Nobody wants that. But that's the first step to healing. And then it enables you and frees you to go and run and get stuff done. I had a great conversation with a performance coach a few years ago, and I was talking about this idea of, I feel stuck in certain things and I'm working really hard and certain things aren't quite happening. And he said, Zaf, you've been running so hard your entire life. And I said to him, I felt like a running life with a parachute on. And he's like, I totally get that. Like American football players, if they're doing sprints, they've got a parachute on their back. And he said, Zaf, I think what you haven't realized is that you are wearing a parachute on your back. I was like, what do you mean? So the moment you realize you're wearing a parachute and you can take it off, or you do things to remove that or weaken the parachute, what's the outcome? Got stronger legs, stronger core, great faculties to be able to tackle these problems. And I'm like, oh, wow. So all of my struggles and my pains and things I've been resenting throughout my life are now actually things that will give me strength to go forward. That's really powerful. Okay. So then almost going back to this idea of highs and lows, those lows are actually the things that fuel the highs.
Yeah, definitely. Big believer in everything happens for a reason.
100%.
And so those things that might seem like the world's most terrible thing has happened are setting you up for something in the future, which is so valuable. But I think as business owners, it's really important that we are vulnerable sharing our stories, because social media is beautiful, it's great, has so much stuff on there, but it is just the best bits of everyone's life. Oh, I have $1 million business, great, but how are you?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's so important that we talk about these things, because there's so many other business owners going through different events thinking that they can't share because they have to show up as their best selves.
This is it. They feel that they need to present that because they've got this coat of armor on and they're not allowed to let anyone look in. And I think that's why conversations like this and a platform like this is really important. And it's important for people to hear that there are two sides to the coin. Yes, you can have the £1 million business or the Lamborghini, but also understanding what the costs are potentially. And are you willing to go on that journey? And if you are, make sure you equip yourself well and surround yourself with good people that have your back and can check in and say, are you okay?
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
And that's what you need sometimes. But have you found it navigating having a family and running a business? Because sometimes those highs and lows affect how you are as a person and what you bring back home.
Oh, that's a really sensitive one.
You don't have to answer it if you
No,
don't want
I'm
to.
very happy to. And I think it's important to, because I look at other peers around me, even co-founders, let's call it what it is. Co-founders I've had over the years, generally speaking, have either been in relationships but not had families, or been single, and so they've only got to look after themselves. For my duration of my time as an entrepreneur, I've always had a family. I've always had a wife. I've always had kids. In fact, when I started my first company, my wife was pregnant with our second child. And there are a different set of considerations. Now, rightly or wrongly, I didn't pay too much heed to a lot of that, because you could think the risk is just not worth it. But it's also, and people often think, what's the worst that could happen? But then you reframe that and say, well, what's the best that could happen? And if I'm put on this earth to serve a greater purpose, how bad would it be if I don't fulfill that? And your family will be there. The key thing that I've learned over the years is managing that expectation and understanding with your kids, with your wife, your partner, whoever it may be, and sharing with them, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is the journey that I'm on. I made a terrible mistake early on in my entrepreneur's journey where I guaranteed a loan for £12 million for the first project that we bought. And I personally guaranteed it along with my 3 other co-directors. I just thought that was par for the course. You've got to do what you got to do to get into business. What I didn't realize was that's a personal guarantee, which is everything you have is on the line. And so, unfortunately, that project went into administration. The bank called in the personal guarantees. And I remember standing at home, receiving a special delivery, my wife standing on my shoulder, and she said, oh, what's that? Dear Mr. Bhunnoo, we are calling in your personal guarantee for £2.5 million. And that's everything you have. Your shirt on your back, your home, everything. And I hadn't told her until that moment in time. And so I committed from that point forwards, I will be open, I'll be honest about what I'm doing. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's about languages.
Yeah.
You know, your kids, your wife, whoever it may be, they just want time with you.
Yeah.
And that might just be sitting down and doing a puzzle, or it might be, you know, having a coffee, whatever it may be. It might be really, really simple. Undivided attention is really important, but sharing with them what you're working on too is really important. It's been a tough balancing act. I don't have it nailed at all. I do have time in my diary where I try to do the school run every single day, valuable time with the kids. I try and have coffee mornings with my wife on certain days of the week. It's her birthday tomorrow. I'm taking her out.
That's very exciting.
She'll know. Oh, she'll by the time this is released, she'll know. So little things like that are really important. And it's, again, about this idea that we're so fixated on being busy. And social media, you mentioned, sensationalizes the idea of being busy.
Yeah.
Being busy versus being productive. And then what are the balances of time that you're working on? So it's a tough one, and it will be a continual path of evolution and understanding and making sure that you manage yourself before you can manage anyone else. And I found if I'm working from home, which happens on occasion, and I'm in business mode, and then I go downstairs, I'm still in business mode. My kids don't want to be interacting with the CEO. They want to be interacting with dad.
Yeah.
So I've got to make a conscious effort to change that. And there are little tips and tricks you can do, whether it's changing your shirt, having a glass of water, tapping the door frame, whatever it may be. There are things that you need to do. But again, you mentioned a point earlier, dialing up emotional awareness. What state am I in?
Yeah.
How do I bring a better state that is the state that my family need at this moment in time, or my shareholders need at this time?
And I think that's so true. I'll get calls off my sister and she'll want to have a relaxed conversation with me, and I will just have to set the tone. I'll be like, I'm really sorry, August. I'm in the middle of business mode right now. I'm trying to whack out some VAT returns. I will call you back in an hour and a half. Are you free then? And she'll go, yes, that's fine. I appreciate you. Let me know. Rather than having a conversation where you're not actually in the conversation
Totally.
because your mind is somewhere else.
And I think we all try to have that conversation with your mind somewhere else. We've all fallen foul of it. But actually just letting someone know, look, I'm not in the right headspace to do it. And bless him, you know, my son, he's 11 years old. And I have to be really careful because he's not going to be 11 for long, and he's a preteen and he doesn't want to hang out with dad. And if he comes along and I'm in the middle of whether it's working on a financial model or getting some investor correspondence out, and he just starts talking to me about his day, and my head is so into this piece of work that I'm not even listening to what he's saying. I have to hold him, like caress him and give him a hug and say, Mikhail, I will speak to you in 20 minutes, half an hour, and we'll set a timer. Yeah. I've actually got like those little Pomodoro timers. Set that on, and then he can do it, and he knows, okay, and he'll come back and check. And then he gives me my space and my time. But it's about managing that expectation and communicating clearly.
100%. But the last question is, what is a piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
A piece of advice to my younger self would be lean into the things that you love, and really lean into what it is that you love. And I didn't do that enough as an individual, and often would put the things that I enjoyed to the side because either they didn't quite fit the mold, they didn't quite fit the norm, or I didn't find that they were accepted in the environment that I was in. And in a bizarre way, like, let's pick one of those elements, my creativity. I studied art at school, but I wasn't allowed to take it forward into A levels or beyond because the traditional, how's that going to pay the bills? But my creativity is one of the things that in my later life, as I've gone back to embrace it, has really helped me, whether it's looking at capital structures, business structures, funding packages, has actually been the thing that's really enabled me to make a big difference. And so I wish, you can never wish for time that you've missed. Go back to find the things that you love and really nurture those things, because that's really what makes you who you are. And you'll only ever grow up with resentment if you don't do the things that you love. So I always try to make a point, whether it's my kids, I'm not going to force you to go to football or to martial arts. If you love it, we'll do it. And so that's what I would be saying to my younger self.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a delight.
Thank you very much.